Hello, and thank you for joining us for this Bay Area housing and economic update for the week of July 30th. My name is Jordan Levine, Deputy Chief Economist here at the California Association of Realtors, and we're going to go through the good, the bad, and the ugly of California, and more specifically the Bay Area's recovery. On the good news front, we have seen significant progress, both in terms of the housing market specifically and also the economy more generally. One of the most encouraging things is that we're seeing lots of demand from home buyers, and realtors, indeed, in our weekly survey, are reporting that they're feeling more optimistic about their business. Now, in terms of the bad news, we do see that, in particular, our lack of supply, which has been a persistent challenge for us in California and certainly in the Bay Area, is starting to impede our recovery. And indeed, although realtors feel optimistic, they're actually reporting weaker numbers in recent weeks on their weekly survey. And indeed, we have seen in our weekly data closed sales starting to decline, and that's been true in the Bay Area as well. And perhaps more troubling is when we look ahead, we have seen several of the key macroeconomic indicators move in the wrong direction. There's nothing to be hugely concerned about moving forward, but certainly it suggests that there will be ongoing headwinds for the housing market, and we're already seeing some of those housing market indicators in particular flag as the amount of uncertainty and downside risk has grown in recent weeks with the resurgence of COVID. So when we look in the rearview mirror, a lot of the indicators that we've seen have been fairly positive. So California had a record number of jobs created. Over 500,000 jobs were added back to non-farm payrolls during June. I didn't bring the unemployment numbers, but we have also seen multiple percentage point reductions in the percentage of folks who are on unemployment. When you look at consumer spending, which is absolutely critical because consumers do represent about 70% still of the US economy as a whole, and particularly once you strip out car sales, we can see that retail spending minus food and autos is actually back to pre-crisis levels. And so again, as go consumers, so goes the economy as a whole, given that they are almost 70% of GDP. Closer to home, we see that interest rates are at all-time low levels. In fact, I think a week ago, we had rates that averaged less than 3% for a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. And that's the first time in recorded history where we have seen contract interest rates for 30-year fixed rate mortgages that low. And the reason why that matters so much is what I'm showing you here, which is the monthly payment, the principal and interest on the California's median priced home. And if you look at June of 2020, that payment on a monthly basis cost $2,160. Now, if you wind the clock back to 2018, when rates were almost 5%, even though prices were lower back in 2018, the payment on the median priced home was actually $300 more expensive back in 2018 than it was in 2020, just last month. And that is all attributable to these low rates. And so $300 a month is significant savings for the home buyers out there. It actually equates to more than $100,000 worth of saved interest payments over the life of that 30-year loan. And lo and behold, we do see consumers are responding to that incentive. And although we had a weekly decline of about 1% in new purchase applications last week from the week before, if you look on the right-hand side, you can see that we're still running about 20%, a little over 20% ahead of 2019's pace, despite all the economic challenges. And so lots of buyer demand out there. I could have brought the data on requests for private showings. Those numbers continue to rise ahead of 2019's pace as well. And indeed, when you look at our numbers for the Bay Area during June, in our press release that we just put out, we can see that the Bay Area bounced back significantly after running more than 40% behind last year's pace. We had a solid increase in June, such that we were only less than 8% behind where we were back in 2019. As sales started to come back, we saw that inventory fell back down to very low levels. In fact, in June, there was just 2.3 months of supply in the Bay Area, and therefore, unsurprising then, that the median time on market going from listing to pending was happening in just 18 days last month, with virtually no discounting, as that median sales to list price in the Bay Area was exactly 100% last month. When we talk about the future, realtors are more optimistic there as well. In our weekly survey, which concluded on the 27th of July, we saw that across the board, realtors were more confident in growing listings, growing sales, and rising prices as we move forward, right? The problem is that all of this demand is starting to butt up against a lack of supply, particularly in the Bay Area, where again inventory was down in the 2.3 months of supply range. We know statewide that new listings were down 43% from where they were in 2019. And so again, we can't put buyers into homes that aren't for sale. And indeed, when you zoom in on the Bay Area in particular, what you can see is that we really haven't had much growth to speak of in terms of new listings since early May. We've, for all intents and purposes, been flat over the last 2 weeks. New listings have declined, but again, lots of demand out there, but we can't turn those into closed transactions because we just don't have the homes to put these buyers in. And of course, then it follows then that we've seen virtually no growth after a significant increase and improvement during April and the first half of May. Pending sales have really started to languish over the course of the last 2 months. Again, not because there isn't demand. We saw that in the mortgage applications, but because there is no stock out there for folks, and thus we saw actually the first decline in terms of closed sales in the Bay Area in about a month and a half, almost 2 months. And so we had first, a couple of weeks where growth in closed transactions in the Bay Area was slowing, and now we've finally seen that give way to a decline in closed sales last week. When we talk to realtors, we see that fewer are doing listing appointments, right? Those numbers have been down 2 weeks in a row, so no immediate help on the horizon from the inventory side of things. We saw actually a slight increase in the number of realtors that entered escrow over the weekend, but in general, those numbers have been down for the last 3 weeks in a row. We had fewer realtors close a transaction last week, and so the market data is showing some slowing, and realtors are also reporting this despite that optimism that they talked about for the future that we already shared during this talk. And so that is kind of the structural issue. And on top of that, we have seen an increase in uncertainty and also just more evidence on how much healing is left to do. We see that the number of COVID cases, the number of COVID deaths are rising, and that will have multiplier effects for the economy as businesses have to clamp back down, as those job losses start to ramp back up. We just got the GDP number that showed that the economy contracted by almost 33% during the second quarter. That's the biggest decline that we've ever had on record for a single quarter of gross domestic product. And so again, just a big hole to climb out of, even as we continued to make progress over the last couple of weeks. And you can see that in the labor markets, that although we have added back over 7.5 million of the jobs lost during April and May, we still have about 15 million jobs to add back before we get to those pre-recession levels. And so again, not to diminish the progress we've made, but just to really underscore that we still have a long road ahead of us, and that the inventory issues are holding us back. And then on top of that, as COVID has started to ramp back up, we've seen that jobless claims have started to move back in the wrong direction nationwide. We had new unemployment claims go up for 2 weeks in a row. Here in California, we're on the leading edge of that, and we've had an increase in new unemployment claims for 6 out of the last 10 weeks. Lots of progress from late March, but again, still folks losing their jobs, and in fact, losing them in increasing numbers, and that will put some downward pressure on the recovery. And we're already seeing this show up in consumer sentiment, which I already underscored as such a critical driver of overall economic growth. Well, after 2 months of rebounding, as COVID started to ramp back up, as people started to lose their jobs again, we have seen that consumers have started to lose some of that confidence that they had been adding back, which again, as 70% of our economy, matters a lot. And so The perhaps most troubling thing associated with increasing economic challenges and job loss is that we're seeing not just more homes go into escrow, or fewer homes go into escrow, excuse me, but actually more transactions falling out. Some due to COVID, some due to financing issues and just other economic hardships associated with job losses and things like that. It's not to alarming levels yet, but we have seen a fairly consistent uptrend from 5% to about 7% over the course of the last 5 to 6 weeks. And if we had our druthers, we would like to see fewer and fewer transactions falling out of escrow. So this just highlights how much healing is left to be done and how many difficulties or challenges remain out there. And so in summary, I would just say that we have made significant progress. We see that in terms of buyer demand. We see it in terms of the labor market starting to come back. We see it in terms of retail sales, which had reached their pre-recession levels, and that has played out across the Bay Area's housing market. But we've got a long road ahead of us, and it's proving to be pretty windy and bumpy. And so again, moving in the right direction, but still a lot of healing left to do. So with that, I will say thank you so much for joining us for this Bay Area economic and housing market update. We will continue to provide updates like these as we get more information. And so until then, thank you for watching.